This episode of CFO Thought Leader is made possible by Planful and Avalara.
Hi, this is Akash Palkhiwala. I'm CFO of Qualcomm, and you're listening to CFO Thought Leader podcast.
This is episode 1030.
Back in the late 80s, if you will, manufacturing wasn't fantastic in North America or in Western Europe. There was lots of closing of buildings and moving stuff to Mexico and or Far East, etc. And it was a painful time. And it was something that, as a relatively young finance professional at the time who was being pushed on those items, it was something that it was hard to do. It was something you lost sleep over because it did impact an awful lot of people. But at the same time, I think I realized and recognized that what I was being asked to do and having to do was going to happen with or without me. And that the best thing I could do would be to listen and learn and understand about how to do this and go through these activities in the most humane way, in the most empathetic way that we possibly could. There's the vast majority of the things we do every day are fun and happy and positive and growing. But part of the role is sometimes on the other side of the coin.
Hi, it's Jack. On today's show, we speak with Don McGuire, CFO of ADP. In 2021, ADP's HR leader reached out to Don McGuire, the company's globe-trotting EMEA president, to see if there was any interest in stepping in to the company's CFO role. McGuire was taken back. It had been nearly 2 decades since he had left the traditional finance career track. During the 20 years that followed, McGuire had filled a variety of global leadership roles far removed from the typical CFO pathway. Still, as the one-time CFO of ADP Canada, McGuire was by no stretch a dark horse candidate. Nonetheless, being CFO of a geography versus CFO of a publicly traded corporation are quite different, or so ADP's CFO tells us. You'll hear about Don McGuire's fateful decision and much more on today's episode. We'll begin after this. Ready to plan confidently, close faster, and report more accurately? Here's what sets Planful apart. Imagine purpose-built applications for every department, from FP&A to accounting, marketing to HR, all with built-in financial intelligence. It's easy to implement Planful in just weeks and with minimal IT involvement, so you can rapidly and seamlessly engage everyone across the business on your key financial progress. Best of all, Planful grows with you. Its unparalleled scalability ensures that no matter how fast your business expands, Planful can keep up. See why over 1,500 customers worldwide choose Planful as their flexible, user-friendly, end-to-end financial performance management platform. Go to planful.com/CFO Thought Leader to see how you can reach peak financial performance with Planful. Hello, we're speaking with Don McGuire, CFO of ADP. Don, welcome.
Hey, Jack. Thank you. Thanks for inviting me.
So we've been looking forward to this in a long time. We've reached out to you from time to time and was very excited when you accepted our invite. Don, take a look back for us and try to identify those experiences you feel that really prepared you to become CFO of ADP.
Sure, Jack. So I think if I look back and think about how I ended up here today, I've really only had 3 full-time professional jobs or with 3 professional employers in my career. I started with Price Waterhouse out of university. You notice I didn't say PwC because it's been a long time. It was still PW back then. I then went from there, I went to Black & Decker in Canada, both in Canada. did some time in Europe with them on an expat assignment, and then went back to Canada and ended up at ADP. And I certainly think that my formal education and my time with Pricewaterhouse certainly helped me prepare for what I was to do in the future. My time at Black & Decker was interesting as well, in that while I was in finance, I was really the finance sales controller, if you will. So not only did I have the finance exposure, but I also had exposure to the real world, if you will, the people on the street who were selling for us every day and making things work. And then I went through the ranks there and ended up being the head of finance for the Black & Decker Canada organization, and came back from an expat assignment, and things were very different at the time. Ended up at ADP about 6 months later and started my journey in finance with ADP there.
From Pricewaterhouse, your decision to jump into industry, to go to Black & Decker. Can you share with us what you were thinking at the time? Did you feel like I've had the PwC chapter complete, it's time to move on? Or what were you thinking at the time?
Yeah, I'm not sure if I was thinking it was complete. Certainly it wasn't. I was only there for about 2 years, but I did think that I got enough of the foundation. I think I was really fortunate in that just having the opportunity to work across a number of industries, whether it was real estate or banking or pensions, manufacturing, and certainly gave me an insight and an understanding of what people do at all the companies that PW was auditing at the time. And I did feel it was ready to go. Quite candidly, quite frankly, auditing wasn't really doing it for me, if you will. I thought that I could contribute more in other places, in other ways, and certainly working with the sales organization of Black & Decker initially when I arrived there was like a ray of sunshine, if you will, just getting into the real business and dealing with the real day-to-day problems. Nobody likes auditors, although I've learned to. But I thought that it was time to move and I would enjoy it more, and indeed I did.
You joined ADP Canada, is that right? From Black & Decker. Can you tell us a little bit about your decision there? What was the opportunity really that you saw?
Yeah, so I did join ADP in Toronto with ADP Canada. As I had said, I had the opportunity when I was at Black & Decker to go to Europe and run a small subsidiary in the fastenings business, or the fixings business, if you're speaking UK English. And I did that for a couple of years and went back to Canada. And in the meantime, Black & Decker had gone through some major changes, spinning off their household product group, amongst other things. And so I really went back to an organization that was much different and much smaller than it had been when I left. And through my network, I ended up getting an opportunity to speak to folks at ADP. And I really liked the company. I'll be honest with you, at the outset, I really didn't know who ADP was. It wasn't a household name. I did, of course, some research, and of course then found out that everybody in the HR space and the payroll space certainly knows who ADP is. And I was very intrigued. And one of the things that intrigued me a lot about ADP from the get-go was that I'd been a finance person at Black & Decker and had the regular stuff, the books and order entry and a number of other things that you do. But what ADP had and still has that is very, very different is this whole money movement operation where we collect the funds from the clients to pass on to the employees and to the tax authorities at their appropriate time. And that business in Canada at the time was handling hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars. And to me, that was something I'd never done before. It was something that looked very interesting. We were in the early stages of having done an acquisition of the Royal Bank of Canada's payroll business, and we had to migrate and set up all of this money movement activity on our own. And so we were in the process of doing that. And to me, that was very intriguing and something was very different. And so I saw that challenge and thought that would be something that would be great for me to add to my resume, and also just something that really, really attracted me, something was a little bit different than day-to-day standard finance.
Well, I just want to show your hand a little bit to the listeners. You've been with ADP today 26 years, so something kept you occupied over that period of time for sure. But I also want to point out, so I think it's a significant milestone. You advanced to become CFO of ADP Canada, but then you take on a more generalized role. Not the path that we might have expected for someone who's already achieved a country's CFO stripe on their sleeve.
Yeah, no, it was interesting. I think I'd been out on a couple of client calls with my boss at the time, who was the president of ADP Canada, and he was I guess he liked the way I handled myself in those meetings, and then I stepped back and thought, maybe I can do things as opposed to reviewing things and certainly sitting through strat plans and helping formulate where we should go. I thought it would be interesting to get involved in the business and see what I could actually do and how I could lead teams. I have to tell you that I had many of my colleagues scratching their heads saying, why would you move from the senior finance role into operations? There was no C in front of the operations role, but there was in front of the finance role. But I did say that, this is a very interesting job, and it's certainly, you have to do it as opposed to critique it, if you will. And so I enjoyed that experience, and I didn't look back on that for many, many years. It was very much a learning experience, getting to be with our clients and our prospects and on a much more regular basis and spending time. I am a firm believer that business people, if you're a good business person, you don't necessarily have to look at your formal training that you had in college or whatever. You can likely move into a different general management role. There are some specializations, of course. It'd be very tough to become a brain surgeon, but at the same time, there are a lot of things you can do with just good general knowledge and good understanding and good work ethic and curiosity for what's going on in the business.
So what that person saw, as you described, he thought you'd be well suited for this role. Am I right? It reveals something about who you were at the time. And sometimes finance leaders struggle with this earlier in their career, where they're not as people-oriented. The idea of managing teams. Here's a CFO of a large geography for us, and we're going to put him in a client services, managing client services teams. Or can you give us a little more color of that?
Yeah. I think it's a lot about managing a team and working with people, bringing them along and them bringing me along. But I think a lot of it is just making sure that you have the curiosity to understand what you need to understand or what you can understand to make the experience for clients better. And certainly having some empathy there towards how that happens and how that works is a very, very important piece of the puzzle. And, finance people all often get, and as I do now, you get accused of being interested in the nickels and the dimes and not necessarily the big picture, although very much all senior finance people these days are very much focused on the big picture. But at the same time, sometimes it's hard to break out of that categorization or that stereotype, if you will. But I think I was able to do that, maybe just through the interactions I had in the presence of my boss, and certainly made a lot of good client friendships along the way. And some of those clients have been with ADP as long as I have. So hopefully they appreciate what I've brought to them through my journey. But I think that it's the curiosity, the willingness to learn, and the willingness to take a chance as well, because it was a chance. I hadn't done it before, but it did. It has. I think it's worked out. So, but I think just having that desire is important.
Donna, the question I have for you is, was there ever a possibility you wouldn't return to finance? And I'll share with the listener, you step into the CFO role in 2021 at ADP after having such titles as president of EMEA and senior vice president of Asia Pacific. It looks like you might have lived abroad for a period of time. You could have gone any one of a number of directions, and I'm sure recruiters, proposed different paths for you along the way, which you rejected. Did you think you were going to return to finance leadership?
Candidly, I did not. By the way, you mentioned I've been with ADP for 26 years, and they've been 26 very rewarding years. I have lived in numerous places. My family has been with me. I'm actually sending one off to Manchester today, the last one out of the house. But they've been with me in the UK. They've been with me in Singapore, back to Europe. And so it has been a fantastic experience. And what I learned within ADP is there were just so many different opportunities. So all of these roles that I was fortunate enough to participate in always helped me learn more, do more, expand on what ADP does and where ADP does things. Certainly, we didn't have a lot in Asia, at least in a connected way at that time. And so we brought that together. That was something that was interesting for me. But I never really thought I would end up back in finance. Just a number of circumstances that landed me back into finance, and perhaps, Carlos Rodriguez, who was the CEO here for 11 years, he joined ADP from Vincam through an acquisition, and he was the VP Finance at the time when he joined. And so maybe we connected on some level. He knew that, I guess, once you become an accountant, you're always an accountant, if you will. So I think there was some of that, but you're quite right. Coming back into the finance role wasn't something that I had anticipated, and I was a little bit surprised and certainly honored when I was given the opportunity to come back into the role.
Wow. Could you expand on that a little more? It's such an interesting, again, here you are globetrotting, having many senior roles in this large corporation. And one day you sit down in a meeting and you're presented with the idea, the CFO spot is yours. Is it an immediate yes, or is it, do you take a pause?
Yeah, so I think that, first of all, I was honored to be asked. And the head of HR at the time reached out to me and asked me if it was something I'd consider. And I was smart enough to make sure I asked at home before I went too much further. But it's a great opportunity. But, what first occurred to me was really, why me? Because there are many good finance people at ADP, and I'm fortunate that many of them are in my organization now, and they've helped me a lot since I've landed back into something that I hadn't been in. And maybe we can talk a little bit later, but the what is very different when I was a CFO in Canada, being a CFO of an individual BU as opposed to being CFO of the publicly traded corporation are two different things. And certainly I hadn't had a lot of experience on the public corporation side, but fortunately I have the good team who's helped me along. But I would say that one of the things that helped me for sure was that because I had been part of the senior management team for a number of years, and because of my tenure and because of all the places I'd worked and all the people's paths I'd crossed and worked with and mentored in some of our formal mentoring programs, et cetera, I certainly had the brand, and I had the confidence of the senior leadership and the CEO and the board, et cetera, to make this move. And I think part of the experience and the journey that I've been on have really contributed to that, just making sure that I took these roles and did these roles to the best of my ability and tried to bring the business along and continue to grow and expand. And through doing that, obviously made the right relationships and the right acquaintances to find myself in a position where I had the support of the appropriate or the right people to move to where I am today.
Well, thank you, Don. We will have a few more career-related questions for you a little later. But right now, we'd like to find out about ADP. And most of us know something about ADP, no question. But tell us about this company today and what sets it apart from its competitors.
ADP is a great company. It's as I said, when I first got the call way back when I was at Black & Decker, I didn't know a lot. I did some research and was surprised at how maybe the word pervasive is a good word, but it was everywhere and just had offers in so many places in so many countries around the world. And I think one of the things that's really important about ADP is just its focus and its dedication. We are an incredibly focused organization, and we're incredibly dedicated to what we do. And not to overstate it, but the reality is that if folks don't get paid tomorrow, it's a problem. And it's a really big problem if folks don't get paid tomorrow on a scale, on a grand scale. That would represent a significant issue. And so that's the way we approach what we do. We are just we're very mindful of the importance that we have in people's lives, day-to-day lives. We're very mindful of what we do and how that makes the economy continue to hum in the U.S. and other markets. So just that mindset is there with everyone. Everyone is nothing but committed and fully committed to what we do. And so that's really, I think, the starting point. And I think that also breeds and results in a culture where there's just so much shared vision about what we need to do to make things better on behalf of our clients and to continue to grow the business, that it just results in a great culture that is fantastic. And the culture is very interesting. This is a company that is very unlike others. We celebrate our 75th anniversary this year. We've had almost 50 years of consecutive dividend increases. Hopefully we get to the 50 this year. In November, the board will approve and make us a dividend king. But we've had 7 CEOs, 7 in 75 years. So if you think that we were founded, our founder back in 1949, Henry Taub, accounting background, we've probably had, if you look at the 7, I think we've had one more person with a finance background than a non-finance background, but it's been very tight, and the people who've run this company have done so for extended periods of time. And I think as a result of that, number one, the right people were hired to take on the roles. And 2, they've been around long enough to make sure that they imposed or embedded the culture that they expected to embed within the company. So it hasn't been in and out and multiple CEOs and 3-4 CEOs in 5-6 years. That's not us. Our company has been very, very consistent in terms of delivering what we do. And one of the ways that that's been done is by making sure that we have consistency in leadership at the top.
Curious, as you entered that role, all the years behind you, all the times you looked into those numbers, in all these different roles that you had different perspectives and why you might have been studying certain numbers or paying attention to other numbers. You step into the finance role, you have the opportunity perhaps to influence the organization in terms of what numbers are, not part of the conversation and should be.
I think that one of the things that I've been able to bring to the conversation is the company's done very well, continues to do very well, but we still have a disproportionate amount of business, in my opinion, in the U.S. domestic market. So we certainly have more offers in the U.S. domestic market because things like PEO don't really exist outside of the U.S. market, the professional employer organization. And money movement is a different value proposition. In the U.S., it's very complicated with the thousands of payees that you have to deal with, et cetera. Whereas in the UK, where I am today, there's one tax collector. That's it. And so even though there's a common underlying user value proposition for payroll and HR that we have across all of the geographies, there are some things in some of the business units and some of the geographies that are different, that drive the growth of the business at different levels and different paces. But one of the things that I hope that I brought to the conversation is the insight into what's happening beyond the North American market, if you will. So arguably, US, Canada, France are our 3 biggest geographies from a revenue perspective, but there's a whole lot more beyond that. And we've done a couple of acquisitions, which I'll talk about later on, but we've done a couple of acquisitions to make sure we have a bigger presence beyond those 3 markets. But certainly the capital allocation conversation is one that is important. An example of that, and something that I still have to remind people of, is that in India, we pay over 1 million people every payday. But in India, price points are very, very low. So it doesn't really show up on the revenue radar the way you would like it to. But it will, as that economy continues to mature and grow and becomes more professional and becomes more urban and less rural and has more professional workers as opposed to agri workers, et cetera, we're going to see that improve. And I think there's other markets and other economies where we're going to see that as well, not to mention just general demographic trends that aren't too favorable in certainly Western Europe and Japan in particular, or South Korea. But we're going to see opportunities in markets that really you need to think about today so you can seed them for the growth in the future. And so hopefully I brought some of that broader, more expansive thinking, if you will, to the boardroom. Then I was a little bit purely self-interested when I had those other roles running those regions. Now I've still got obviously some friends and some understanding of what goes on in those markets, but I do have an opportunity to help influence the the allocation of our investment a little bit more than I had in the past.
What about your team members, the finance people? Many finance leaders will quickly admit to us, no, we haven't grown the finance team, but we're using our people a little differently. Is that your case, or how would you look at it?
Well, I have an interesting finance team in that I do have a couple of people in the finance team who look like me in the sense that our corporate treasurer is someone who actually followed me into the president of the Asia Pac role. And so finance before, out into the business, back into finance. I have some other folks who have had great experience in some of our individual BUs and then come back to corporate. So I think that we certainly have a lot of capability, a lot of skills that are outside or beyond purely traditional finance, if you will, in the team. So I think that's working for us. And I do think that having those broader skill sets is really important to the overall success of the team. The teams get very involved and in what goes on. So if I was to divide my team into two groups, if you will, I have the BU CFOs. So the CFOs who support international and small business and mid-market and upmarket and our PEO. Those folks spend the bulk of their time with their own BUs, the BU presidents, and they contribute very much to the growth of the business and understanding the business. So that's what they do. And then on the other side, in the other group, I very much have the corporate functions, the treasury functions and the IR function, the corporate controller function, etc. So those groups are all contributing to the broader finance role, but they're contributing in different ways. And often we will put corporate people on to help with potential acquisitions or project development that's happening in some of the BUs, just to give them some more depth, if you will, and bandwidth. But the finance organization today gets a lot more involved in things like strategy and some of the operational issues, perhaps, than it did if I look back on my career years ago. So certainly I think finance team isn't growing too much. As a matter of fact, through a lot of efficiencies that we're seeing with AI and et cetera, we're seeing basically a flat finance organization despite growing the revenue by $5 or $6 billion over the last number of years. So certainly that's something we're focused on as well.
I want to touch on talent with you. We wonder, since your arrival in the CFO office, if you've redeployed your people in a different fashion, your FP&A professionals, perhaps. Have you used them differently?
Yeah, so FP&A has changed somewhat. I think because we're able to utilize models better than we had, models have improved. If you look at ADP, the beauty of ADP from an investor perspective is that our business is incredibly predictable. So we know how many people we pay, we know how much is recurring. The one-time revenue we get for setup or projects it's significant, but it's not gonna move the needle too much. Our models are very, very predictable. And so what we've done over time is we've centralized some of those models and the people who work on those models across some of our BUs to make sure that we can leave the BU CFOs, if you will, to focus on more of the project type understanding and the intricacies of the competition in the various segments we're in, et cetera, and really leverage the FP&A folks almost more of a back office perspective. They're sitting in the back, they're liaising and communicating, if you will, with all of the BUs, but they're able to build much more elaborate and much more predictable models that have been very successful in making sure that we hit our forecasts and meet the expectations and the guidance that we've issued to the street. I will tell you, I start off by saying it's great when you're an investor in ADP because we're so predictable. It's terrible, though, because you're so predictable. There's an expectation that you don't miss by 1% or 2% because you just shouldn't. Very much unlike my life at Black & Decker, quite frankly. If there's a bread maker one year or a snake light or a dustbuster feature, the year comes and goes on a couple of new products. At ADP is just much more predictable, but certainly has a very much different expectation around predictability and the consistency of the numbers.
As the finance leader, one would expect, and I think it's a very predictable business, but at the same time, we wouldn't be surprised to hear you say something to the effect of, it's amazing how much time I spend speaking to our investors and earnings calls and preparing in that sense. It's not like you weren't exposed to investor relations before, but now you're there. You're the point person. Can you share what part of the job is really connecting and communicating to investors?
No, you're spot on, because I think as I look back, and people ask me how I found it or how I'm finding it, because we're 3 years in, give or take. If they ask me what surprised me, I would say what has surprised me the most is how much time you have to take to prep for earnings calls. So, the planning and whatnot is that's not so surprising. Certainly, a lot more to roll up and a lot more BUs to be concerned about. But I continue to be surprised at how much time it takes. I talk to fellow CFOs, and many of us record our tenure based on number of earnings calls we've participated in. In my case, it's a dozen, but it has gotten better over time. Certainly, the first calls were different, but has gotten better over time. But it's amazing how much you have to prep and prepare for what usually ends up being 35 or 40 minutes of Q&A in an earnings call, just to make sure that you're absolutely prepared and have as much information as you possibly can to answer those questions. So it's certainly challenging. I tell my wife it's like doing a GMAT prep every 90 days, but it is, I would say, the biggest surprise in the role has just been the amount of time that's required to work with the street.
We want to touch on AI with you, and clearly it's an important part of the conversation with investors these days, as well. As I was just listening to the earnings call, learning about ADP Assist and how you folks are really articulating a vision behind ADP Assist. Can you reflect a little on what ADP Assist is and how there's a bigger strategy maybe behind the branding?
Yeah, maybe before I get to ADP Assist, it's one of the many things we've done over the years to kind of be a leader, if you will, in the payroll space. So if you go back to when we first went public, the proceeds from the IPO, a lot of those proceeds went towards buying the first IBM mainframe so that we could actually process payroll in the mainframe. We've also done things initially we were the first with the mobile app. We've been the first in the cloud, et cetera. So there's been a lot of firsts. And I'd like to think that we're going to be early, if you will, or one of the firsts with Gen AI. ADP Assist in particular is just how to help clients when they get to a point in their journey through our software, bring solutions or suggestions, or after a while using Gen AI to understand why we get to this point, making sure that we take those steps out of the process entirely, so to make sure that a client has the best experience they can have. And some of these things are expected, or they're coming down. They're premeditated, if you will, to the extent if you're keying emails these days or finishing the sentences for you. Can we do the same thing with payroll? So that's really what ADP Assist is helping us do. But that's only one of the areas where we're using Gen AI within ADP. Certainly, we are using it in our sales organization in two specific areas. One, around the call prep, trying to understand clients before we reach out to them. So you can now get an awful lot of information and prepare that, so you don't have to go spend the time searching the internet, making notes, writing notes. A lot of that comes your way and helps you be prepared, and then also helps you decide who might be a better candidate for that outreach today, as opposed to just outreaching to everybody in the same cadence. The other area within sales is just the opportunity to whisper in someone's ear and provide that coaching that you might have got from a supervisor in the past, sitting next to you with one ear on their headset, listening to the interaction with the prospect. Well, now you have the opportunity to have someone whisper to you what you should say next, or what you should anticipate next, based on all of the thousands and tens of thousands of interactions that have come before. So those are two very important areas there. And then, of course, like many companies, we are also looking at how to take our interactions with our clients. We get tens of millions of interactions a year with our clients around the world, and how do we take those and use Gen AI to go through and sift through what clients are asking about, what they're concerned about, et cetera, and how can you use that information differently and get the real reasons people call. Simple story, when I joined operations initially, so why do people call us or why do people contact us? And it was like, well, we think. And then, of course, we had the age of CRM and tools, and we put drop-down boxes on, and we said, oh, they call us for A, B, or C, or other. Well, it was usually the first reason was the first drop-down box, or then it went to other. And so you really didn't have the opportunity to go through these millions of interactions in a way that would give you a more accurate response on how things were, why people were contacting us and what they wanted, what they needed. And now with things like Gen AI, some of these tools are fantastic. You can really get that stuff done in real time. And you're no longer guessing or hoping that people are picking the right reason for the contact. And so those are some of the areas where things are pretty exciting and coming quickly.
Just as far as when you think over your career with ADP and you think about the different technology paradigms, cloud computing, clearly, ADP with so many other businesses sort of reinvented itself in certain ways. Is AI, in your mind, something similar of magnitude, or?
I think it will be. I do think that there's an awful lot of hype, early day hype, and as a matter of fact, I think it's softened a little bit of late. I think in the early days it was going to, world peace and all the diseases in the world were going to be cured instantaneously because of Gen AI. But I do think it's going to have a long-lasting impact. But I do think, like things like the internet, like things like the cloud, like things like even CD-ROMs and what you could send out to a client, it's going to take some time before we see the full impact of the capabilities. Some of the areas that we see, and because we have so much data and so much interaction, if someone's looking for how to pay their taxes correctly in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, we probably have enough interaction and enough answers to make sure that we can get that boiled down to a point where not only can we help our clients, but we can train our own people to make sure that some of these edge cases and some of the things that you really haven't thought about or seen enough volume with in a normal course of business can be at your fingertips. So there are just so many different ways we can use the data, and so many different ways that we can expand upon the experience and improve the experience that clients and employees, importantly employees, more and more of the employees of our clients connect with ADP directly through the mobile app. And we're also making sure that we're spending an awful lot of time understanding their usage of our apps to make sure that we can not only improve the employer's experience, but also improve the employee's experience. And Gen AI just has a whole bunch of tools that are going to allow us to do that over time.
Many finance leaders will quickly tell us that when it comes to the finance function, they'll discuss AI and the efficiencies that can be captured. But we're wondering if, for instance, could it potentially contribute to your planning process or enhance your planning process in some way?
Yeah, we've explored a few things, and I think early there were a lot of expectations about what was going to happen. Certainly, we've done some things in finance, collections, for example, using some of the tools I just described on call summarization, setting up alerts, doing things better. Certainly, I mentioned earlier we have the large portfolio of client funds that we invest using Gen AI and using some of the modeling capability there to help us understand what the expectations are going to be about our interest earnings going forward. And that's a big piece of our planning process. And also looking at using Gen AI to understand win rates, et cetera. So what are win rates in our small business versus mid-market versus national account market? And how much confidence, what are the confidence levels we should be attaching to our sales expectations and our client retention expectations? So there's a number of ways and areas where Gen AI has found itself of use in finance, and I expect that's going to continue.
All right. Well, there's a group of three of your senior FP&A professionals down the hall in a conference room, and Don swings open the door. What is going through their mind? What is Don about to ask them?
The FP&A group?
The FP&A seniors, a group of your senior FP&A, the door swings open. It's Don. What are they thinking? Don's going to ask us.
They're not thinking, I think what they're expecting is, how are we doing against our targets, and are we making sure that we're asking all the right questions to make sure we're getting as much as we possibly can out of the individual BUs, and then distilling that to make sure that we're making reasonable commitments to the street around expectations and providing good guidance. So I think the use of FP&A, or the FP&A function itself, is to make sure that our models work and that what we're talking about makes sense and is contestable. Like someone goes in and pushes and prods. Are the numbers realistic? Are we really able to achieve this? How much stretch do we think we have? Are we being too conservative? Are we being too aggressive? So I think trying to get the team to make sure that they're testing against all of those things as they go out, in particular to the BUs, and try to get the roll-ups done and where we should be pushing. I think that's what I'm asking for. And often it's the folks who contribute the most get the most. I often tell my FP&A team that the folks who are contributing, if they come and they ask for investments to expand their business, listen hard. The folks who are behind the ball and struggling a little bit and asking for more, be cautious, because they got to have a better story because they haven't delivered yet, or they're not delivering to the same degree. So just make sure you're pushing on all the buttons and making sure you're getting the right answers, or the answers themselves are supportable.
Great, thank you for that. We're going to move to what we refer to as our finance strategic moment question. We're just looking for just a moment of insight that you've experienced along the way. Perhaps it was pursuing an opportunity, avoiding a risk, but your lines of sight into the organization allowed you to see something. What comes to mind when we ask for a finance strategic moment?
Yeah, as we discussed, I had the opportunity to be outside of finance for most of my career. But if I go back and I think about a finance moment, and this was an unfortunate one, back in the late 80s, if you will, manufacturing wasn't fantastic in North America or in Western Europe. There was lots of closing of buildings and moving stuff to Mexico and or Far East, et cetera. And it was a painful time. And it was something that, as a relatively young finance professional at the time who was being pushed on those items, it was something that it was hard to do. It was something you lost sleep over because it did impact an awful lot of people. But at the same time, I think I realized and recognized that what I was being asked to do and having to do was going to happen with or without me. And that the best thing I could do would be to listen and learn and understand about how to do this and go through these activities in the most humane way, in the most empathetic way that we possibly could. And I would say that really left an imprint on me, in that there's the vast majority of the things we do every day are fun and happy and positive and growing. But part of the role is sometimes on the other side of the coin. And you really, really need to make sure that you understand that and you don't shy away from that, because it is very important to the longevity of companies. It's very important to make sure that things are handled and migrated in terms of what we do and transitioned, and systems change and processes change and expectations change. You really, really have to listen to both sides. And you really can't shy away from some of the more difficult things that have to be done when they have to be done. So I think the learning there, or the big moment there, and the opportunity I had was to really play a middleman role, if you will. Certainly, you can imagine the reaction of the manufacturing organizations and the locations. You can imagine the stress that was on the HR organization, the stress that was on the finance team, and everybody was needing to support these decisions and these activities. And I think it gave me, as a finance leader and a very young finance leader at the time, it just gave me a chance to grow up a little bit, if you will, and realize that some of these decisions and things that have to be done are very, very complicated, and they just need to get done. And I think when I look back, as much as I didn't like what had to be done, it was very much a moment for maturing into a business leader and a broader finance leader.
This episode is presented by Avalara. That's the sound of not worrying about sales tax compliance. Because when you automate it with Avalara, you don't have to worry about collecting sales tax or tracking who and what is tax exempt. With Avalara, you don't even have to worry about new tax laws and regulations. Avalara does it for you. If your business sells internationally, Avalara has you covered with cross-border tax compliance solutions. And when it comes time to file tax returns, Avalara automatically takes care of that too, giving you one less thing to worry about. Avalara has managed billions of sales for small, mid-size, and enterprise businesses, and seamlessly works with your current sales, e-commerce, and accounting platforms. Take the worry out of tax compliance with Avalara. Learn more at avalara.com. That's AVALARA.com.
We're going to jump to our mentoring round, where we'll ask you several quick questions intended to inform and inspire future finance leaders. Don, we want you to think back to the first 60 days in the CFO role and what might have occurred to you. You had a fresh set of eyes. You brought a fresh set of eyes to this finance leadership role. As you described, you might not have returned to the finance leadership. It might not have been in the path ahead of you. It was. But when you return that first 60 days, you recall having a moment where you thought, wow, that's an interesting part of this role that somehow I never quite understood or could see coming?
Yeah, I was fortunate, like most finance leaders, all finance leaders at ADP, I came into an organization that certainly had an awful lot of capability and very experienced and seasoned individuals. So I didn't have any negative surprises from that perspective. I guess that I mentioned it a little bit earlier. The things that did surprise me were just the amount of prep time and the amount of preparation needed to talk to the street on a regular basis. How much of my day and quarter that was going to take. By the way, I do enjoy it, but it was very much a surprise. There were things that, as much as I had worked in the money movement organization in Canada, I wasn't actually investing the funds. So we have a very elaborate laddering process to invest the funds. And of course, we have to make sure that we provide or follow a number of policies and how much we're allowed to have in certain segments and the credit ratings of some of our investments and et cetera. So the depth of some of those activities was something that you don't see. They're kind of behind the curtain, if you will, or below the surface. But there's an awful lot of people doing an awful lot of very, very strategic and very, very technical work, making sure that we have appropriate policies around our money movement strategy, making sure that we have appropriate insurance in place for things like cyber insurance today, which is becoming more and more important, and understanding the risks, things like some of the enterprise risk management areas that as much as an operator I was aware of, but certainly when you start aggregating all of those things and start looking at a corporate or a company-wide, enterprise-wide lens, they're much more complicated and much deeper than you perhaps appreciated in the past. So I think it was, for me, I had experience with many of these areas, but the difference was being at the helm and being able to work with the people who were my great team, who were doing all of the day-to-day to make sure that we are the consistent deliverer that we are, was very, very insightful for me.
We always like to ask our guests to reflect a little on the personal side with us. Is there something perhaps most of your colleagues don't know about you? You lived in different parts of the world. You had all these different types of experiences. Certainly there's something that a lot of people don't know.
Because I've been with ADP for 26 years now, there's probably not much that I can surprise with. But I would say that one of the things that is interesting about me, and maybe not because I'm a Canadian, but I did spend a lot of time, started refereeing ice hockey when I was 12 years old in northern Quebec. My father was in the Canadian military, and we were kind of all over the world even before I started working. But I refereed ice hockey up to some very, very senior levels. Had the opportunity to do some tournaments in the U.S., some tournaments in Finland. In addition, I was able to pay my way through university. I paid my way through university with my refereeing money, and spent a little bit of time toying about whether or not I should be a professional referee as a career. Some of my colleagues, some of my refereeing friends actually did make careers in the NHL. They're all retired now, by the way. But it was an interesting opportunity, and I did get to skate on the ice with some very impressive NHL stars who became impressive NHL stars in the future. But I'm not certainly big enough to play the game, and certainly I'm not sure that I was big enough to referee the game either.
And you have all your teeth today.
No, that's definitely not true.
Yikes. Okay. What about a book? Any book come to mind, some recommendation? It doesn't have to be a business book. Maybe it's just something you escaped with.
There is a book that I have in my bookshelf, and I pulled it out because I knew you'd be asking this question. And it's not a finance book, but it's a book that's been around for a while. It's called Getting Things Done, and it's by somebody called David Allen. And it's basically, how do you have a relatively or less stressful life? How do you deal with what's on your desk every day and make sure that you can keep your sanity and have some personal time? And I found that I do find from time to time when things pile up and you're getting into year-end close and strat plans and guidance issuance and all those things, that sometimes you need to step back and make sure you put things in the right bucket and make sure you focus on what needs to get done as opposed to what has to get done. So that book, I think, has saved me a couple of times. I have imposed it on my kids a couple of times, my two sons, to make sure they can get through the studies. But to me, it was a very, very insightful book. It wasn't about finance, just really, how do you cope with what's on your desk? How do you cope with the volume of things that we end up doing now in the hundreds and thousands of emails you deal with in a day, in a month, and a year or so? It has been very helpful.
That's great. Thank you. We are nearly up to our final question. I do want to revisit that decision way back when, and I've already explored it somewhat with you, but it just seems back in 2002 when you went off on a more general path. It was 2002. It wasn't 2022. It wouldn't be a surprise to us to hear today that a finance executive opted to broaden themselves and learn more about the greater business in the world. And when we look over your bio, that's the surprise to us. And again, you've outlined it pretty much for us, but you don't reflect too much on it today. You don't wonder what influenced you at the time more.
No, life's a journey, and I think that it's a journey, hopefully, of learning and experience. And I think that taking the opportunity to have this experience, and I think it served me well. Certainly, even if I hadn't come back to the finance role, I've certainly had a very rewarding and enjoyable career at ADP. So I wouldn't have been unhappy not to have landed here. I'm very happy that I have. But I do think that, and I encourage some of my team now, everyone wants to know what's next and what can I do next and where can I get to? And the route to leading a finance organization or a service organization or a company for that matter doesn't have to be linear. That's not just in terms of the titles of roles within your discipline, but it's also, I think, within the titles of the various types of jobs you can do within a company. So I do encourage my team, if there's something that you see in operations that you think is interesting that you will learn from, you can always come back to finance should you want to. You may never want to, but if there's something out there that you think is going to keep the spark in you alive for a long time, take the opportunity, take the chance, because even if you find that it didn't work out to your expectation down the road, you can always come back to finance or you can do something else. But always take the opportunity to learn more, do more, and just keep curious, and think it's more rewarding.
Okay. Well, thank you for that. We are up to our final question where we're going to ask you to look forward finally. And what we'd like to know are your priorities as CFO for the coming 12 months. what would those be?
Well, I'm going to take the easy out initially here and say the priorities are always making sure we achieve the guidance that we set in the street. I think that goes without saying. But I think on a more structured basis, though, some of the things that we've touched on earlier today, Gen AI continues to be more important in the business. So we need to make sure that we're investing the right amount and getting the returns that we expect in a reasonable timeline. They won't be overnight or tomorrow morning, but we do need to get returns on those investments, and we will. So making sure we stay focused on that. We always have the capital allocation discussion, organic versus inorganic. Should we be considering doing acquisitions? There's always something on the desk. Usually it's most things, the vast majority of things don't make sense because they're not a good fit. So we always have things that we need to review, though, to make sure we get to that assessment. And then making sure that we continue that dialogue with the street and the broader stakeholders, not just the investors or the owners of our company, but also making sure that we're doing what we can to make sure that all of our associates are motivated to deliver the way they do every single day, to make sure that our customers are experiencing what we expect or what we want them to experience, and that is easy to use, frictionless solutions and tools to their problems so they can focus on what they do in their business. And so to the extent that as a finance leader within ADP, I can help contribute to those items, I will and I do. I think that there's always lots to do and always lots on the go, and making sure we deliver to expectations is, of course, always at the top of the pile.
Don McGuire, thank you for joining us on CFO Thought Leader.
Thank you very much, Jack. Enjoyed it very much.
Hello, everyone. Jack here. Hope you've been enjoying our recent episodes of CFO Thought Leader. Please know that I don't take for granted this opportunity to serve you. Your time is valuable, and of course, so is the time of our CFO guests. I'll admit to you on certain weeks, I will pinch myself and say, hey, I get to do this for a living. I speak to all these impressive leaders. Undoubtedly, there are more aggressive interviewers out there, some who leave no stone unturned. But our swim lane is for finance leaders only. And those finance leaders have a unique style of leadership, one that is rooted in the burden of trust. In light of this, finance leaders must take great care not to forfeit this trust as they step into the role of being a more expressive leader. And that is what CFO Thought Leader is really about. That's why I try to remind myself week in, week out, how fortunate I am. Still, I need your help. Tell us what we're doing right. Tell us what we're doing wrong. Email me your comments at jack@cfothoughtleader.com. And please visit cfothoughtleader.com. You'll find a listener survey right on the nav bar. As always, thank you for listening.